The classic football division between blue and red. Noisy neighbors. One team celebrating a treble while the other celebrated promotion. A club that won silverware throughout their history versus one that won in bursts, at least until the pendulum swung in their direction. From what was a one-sided local rivalry, now has bled onto the continental stage, as City's recent successes have well and truly changed the city from red to blue in the last decade, one title win at a time, leaving supporters of United to only be able to point at the financial investigations as their one and only dagger for their rivals. The Manchester Derby may not offer much when it comes to a cultural, religious, or class divide, but that doesn't mean that it's short on drama and disdain. Hey there and welcome to yet another edition of Rabona TV's Roots of the Rivalry, and thank you for joining me here today. I'm Adrian, the guy behind the channel. If this is your first time here, then as you watch the video, if you find yourself enjoying it, then be sure to subscribe for more videos on the greatest rivalries around the world. I've covered a lot of them already, as well as explainer videos and timely coverage of the Champions League, etc, etc. But let's get started with the foundational history of both clubs, as well as how this rivalry has evolved and changed over the years. There are a few that have changed quite like this one, so let's get into it. Now, if you saw my video on the Liverpool versus Manchester United rivalry, then a lot of this foundational history of United will sound pretty damn familiar to you. In 1878, workers from the carriage and wagon department of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Depot in Newton Heath formed a football team that went by the name of Newton Heath LYR. LYR, of course, standing for Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. These carriage and wagon department workers would compete against other departments within the Newton Heath Depot, against other teams within the LYR, and at times against teams from other rail companies entirely. In the first match on record of the Newton Heath LYR football team, they lost to Bolton Wanderers reserve team 6-0. The colors they wore at this time were the colors of the LYR itself, gold and green, which will be familiar to you, I'm sure. At this point, they were still just an amateur football team. For the 1892-93 season, they finally decided to join the Football League, having since cut their ties with the LYR Railway Company, and joining simply as Newton Heath. Their first season was pretty shit, and honestly, that's being nice about it. They won just 6 of their 30 matches and finished bottom of the table. Their second season, same story, dead last, and this time relegated to the second tier of English professional football by another one of the clubs that would become heated rivals with them, Liverpool. Newton Heath would remain in the second division for quite a while, as I'm sure you could have guessed, given how things were going early on. And from there, things would only get worse for the club that would go on to become Manchester United, as financial struggles would plight the team for years as they nosedived down the standings in the second tier of English football. Until 1902, when local brewery owner and eventual president of the club, John Henry Davies, got together with other business owners to bail Newton Heath out of their £2,670 of debt in exchange for some ownership and control of the club. Man, if only the debt was that low for most clubs these days. Now, part of said control that they'd had was a changing of the name to better represent the city of Manchester. Some of the options on the table were Manchester Central and Manchester Celtic, but Manchester United was ultimately chosen in April of 1902. But if you look at United's official history, they say April/May of 1902. United's rise through the ranks of the league happened immediately, with Manchester United sealing promotion back into the first division in 1906, making their return in the 1906-07 season, where they finished in a respectable 8th. In the following year, they smashed the league, finishing 9 points ahead of second place Aston Villa for their first league title in their history. In the following year, they won their first FA Cup title. As for United's home of Old Trafford, they first played in that stadium on February 19th, 1910 against who else but Liverpool. However, it wasn't a happy day for United, as Liverpool won a 7-goal thriller 4-3. In 1911, United won another league title, but from here on, it all got a little dark for them, as they promptly became somewhat of a yo-yo club until much later in their history. But while we're in this sort of foundational era, way back in 1880, 143 years ago, the rector of St. Mark's Church, aka the dude in charge of the parish, decided with his daughter that they should start a football team by the name of, well, St. Mark's. Said rector, Mr. Arthur Connell, and his daughter, Anna Connell, wanted to start the club to give members of the parish in the local area something to do in their spare time, as most football clubs started out as. In fact, the first match between the side that would become Man City versus the side that would become Manchester United ended with Newton Heath LYR winning 3-0 against St. Mark's, or West Gorton, on the 12th of November 1881, 142 years ago. Their first shirt was black with a white Maltese-style cross, which, as Man City's official history claims, could be down to the club's links to the Freemasonry back in the day. Nicolas Cage will be all over that. Or it could have been a nod to good old St. Mark's Church. But whatever it may have been, in 1887, they changed their name to Ardwick AFC. In 1892, the second division of the Football League was created in England, with Ardwick AFC as one of the founding members. Except just 2 years later, they would change their name once again. Remember how the Reds changed their name to Manchester United in order to represent the entirety of the city in 1902? Well, the club that would go on to become City changed from Ardwick AFC to Manchester City in 1894 in a similar bid to represent all of Manchester. They did so 8 years prior to their rivals, Manchester United. In fact, there are some football historians who point to City as being the club in Manchester during their initial years, as their name change and the fact that they had recently moved to Hyde Park for all of their home matches, a much bigger stadium, meant that they could accommodate more fans, and more fans would come, making them the most popular of the Manchester clubs, at least in the early 1900s. But anyway, Man City were promoted to the first division of the English Football League in 1899 as they won the second division, and 5 years later, they won the FA Cup by beating Bolton 1-0 at Crystal Palace, not at Wembley just yet. However, speaking of Wembley, quite a few years later, after going up and down in the rankings, they had one of the most insane seasons in 1926. Even without a manager at the time, they still became the first Manchester club to play at Wembley as they fell in the final of the FA Cup, and they were also relegated. They really did it all that year, but 2 years later, they would return to the first division. And it would get better from there as well, as they would win their first English First Division title during the 1936-37 campaign, just a couple of years after they had won their second FA Cup as well. Things were going well for City in the 30s. While each side had their moments going up and down in the English Football League system, both Manchester clubs were quite strong at the end of the 1960s. United, having just gone through the Munich air disaster in 1958, had bounced back under Sir Matt Busby, winning the league twice in the 60s, as well as an FA Cup, and having become the first English side ever to win the European Cup, that being in 1968. For their part, Manchester City went on a bit of a golden run in the late 60s as well. Having gained promotion back into the first division during the 1965-66 season, they followed that up with a first division title just 2 years later during the 67-68 season, as well as an FA Cup in the following year, and a League Cup the year after that in 1969-70. Quite the rash of winning, but it wasn't to stick around. The 75-76 EFL Cup win would be the last piece of silverware for quite some time for Manchester City. And even then, when City had this little spurt of silverware accumulation, Manchester United's trophy cabinet was still much bigger than that of Manchester City's. And remember how we said that Man City was the more popular club in the early 1900s? Well, all of that had changed with the glory that United had managed to achieve from about the 50s onward, where United were mostly solid in the first division and/or winning titles. Manchester City were touring the various levels of English football, and unfortunately for them, they went without silverware for quite some time. I mean, Manchester City had won the second division as of 2002. They were promoted to the second division only in 1999 as a third place team, and that's how recently the tides have changed for this rivalry. While United was winning a treble in 1999, Man City was getting promoted to the second division. For decades, kids who supported City had to go to school in shame as their United supporting mates rubbed it in their faces. Decades of this, really. They were, in fact, the Spurs of that time, at least if you were a Manchester United supporter. So much so that they became a figure of fun amongst certain United supporters, a big joke, according to them. If you've been to a match, then you'll know that outside of stadiums in Europe and Britain, there are countless stands of people hawking souvenirs, unofficial gear, half and half scarves, etc. For a long time, outside of Old Trafford, you could find t-shirts adorned with the following statement: 1976 was a strange year for English football. City won a trophy. And it went further. In 2001, a group of United supporters from Red Issue, the fan magazine, were organizing a 25th silver anniversary party in City's name. What? Well, it was a tongue-in-cheek, ironic party to mark 25 years without a top-flight trophy for Manchester City. While the party didn't go as initially planned, there was still a celebration amongst some of the members of Red Issue and United followers, with banners planted around the city to celebrate City's achievement. Kind of just feels like bullying. No? I mean, given the state City was in, it was no competition, right? But this is football. And that's sort of the disposition that Sir Alex Ferguson had taken. As he was running through the Premier League at a consistent basis with United, winning title after title, he never deigned to accept Man City as a rival, constantly dismissing them and saying that Liverpool were indeed their biggest rivals, not City. That was part of the fun for United supporters, I guess, a way of sticking the knife in and giving it a little twist by making fun of them, and then saying they aren't even at their level from a competitive standpoint, and that they rank others, such as Liverpool, much higher than them. At this point, Liverpool, of course, having a rivalry with Manchester itself. That's something that both sides of Manchester could understand, that sort of hatred or disdain for Liverpool. At this point, if you were to look at the Manchester rivalry in the late 90s, early 2000s, it would be incredibly one-sided. A rivalry based upon being the best team in the city, only for one team to so drastically outdo the other. There wasn't much fun in it. It was just one-way traffic. In fact, going back to that 25th silver anniversary party that Red Issue threw, Red Issue even claimed that they were ready for the 50th anniversary and had pre-booked a room for February of 2026. That's how bad City was. That's how far off they seemed from winning a top-flight trophy again. They were just a mess. That is, until 2008 came around. The story of the United Arab Emirates takeover of Manchester City is a tale that we are all intimately familiar with at this point, but here are the spark notes. In 2008, the Abu Dhabi United Group became the new owners of Manchester City. They install Mark Hughes as their manager and begin breaking British transfer records with signings such as Robinho. But as we have seen, and as Manchester United themselves have provided a good example of, it takes more than just money to start winning trophies. And while City were spending a lot for squad overhauls, they were also building from the foundations upward, something that the Glazers, who had purchased Manchester United 3 years prior, were not doing. They simply threw money at problems in the transfer window and didn't have a coherent plan behind it, something that was exposed with the departure of Sir Alex Ferguson. But the seeds of City eclipsing United at a sporting level in the present were sowed quite a while prior. First, there was Carlos Tevez opting to leave United to join City, and the welcome to Manchester signs that came with the move, something that incensed Sir Alex Ferguson and the United faithful. Then there was the 2010-11 FA Cup semi-final win for Manchester City over Manchester United, where City would go on to lift the FA Cup and qualify for the Champions League for the first time in their history. Shortly after that, City would smash United 6-1 at Old Trafford, and coupled with recent events, recent wins, and everything that was happening behind the scenes, some felt like this was where the momentum shift had begun. Fast forward to the end of the season, and we saw the iconic goal from Sergio Aguero against Queen's Park Rangers, that last gasp winner to snatch the title from under Manchester United's noses, and a moment that lives in infamy for City supporters and Premier League neutrals alike. In fact, there's even a box suite at the Etihad entitled the 9320 Suite, the name coming from the time that Aguero scored against QPR. Ferguson was no longer dismissive of City as he had been previously, with the whole Liverpool are our real rivals, not City, etc, etc. Now he referred to them as noisy neighbours, which would be worn like a badge of honour by the club and their supporters, proudly acknowledging how Ferguson's quote was proof of the progress City had made thus far. Where previously they were dismissed, now they were under his, United supporters, and the rest of the league's skin. Upon Ferguson leaving, and of course, getting retribution for the Aguero League title by winning it again, The branching paths between these two clubs went in very different directions, with the one constant being a ton of money spent. Both City and United are high up on the net spend rankings. As of September 2023, United are at the top of the list with £1.2 billion net spend on transfers in the last decade, the only club on planet Earth to reach a net spend of over £1 billion, while Man City have recently been overtaken by the likes of Chelsea, Arsenal, and Liverpool when it comes to net spend. They sit in 5th. A few things to keep in mind here though. Net spend is obviously the net of both your incoming and outgoing values, which would point towards City buying smart, I guess. Their signings have typically left the club for a high number, while United's haven't really. Also, much of City's crazy spending came earlier in the decade, where they were constantly breaking records for the most expensive Englishman, defender, goalkeeper, midfielder, etc., 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 whereas inflation has skyrocketed the prices recently. If you were to adjust all of the prices for inflation, City would probably be higher on the list, given the signings that they made earlier in the decade. And on top of all of this, City have been consistently under investigation either by UEFA or now by the Premier League itself due to alleged financial breaches by the club. This has inevitably leaked its way into the rivalry, as expected. Where United fans once could say that City was buying success due to their transfer fees, the Glazers have become big spenders as well. They just haven't spent smartly. But now that City are an example to many of how to build a coherent structure for a club, how to build lasting success, then the focus from their rivals goes to the investigations, given everyone is spending about the same amount these days, and how City's sales of players has actually led to them slipping to 5th amongst Premier League clubs when it comes to net spend in the last decade, just as we went over. But this video isn't to go over City's financial investigations, but it must be brought up as it definitely plays a role in this rivalry. A rivalry that was started 142 years prior between two teams that fought to represent the entire city of Manchester given their two name changes. A rivalry that saw them compete to be the best in the city, and at one time, it was close before it shifted drastically in the direction of Manchester United and stayed that way for decades, while City was the laughingstock of Manchester, according to the Red side. Then, with the help of seemingly limitless funds, City gave themselves a chance at success, while put the pieces in place such as Pep Guardiola, LAKEY, and others to help build a club that is still part of the community, while also propelling themselves to the top of Europe with their recent treble. Where City were once the laughingstock, now Manchester United and their trials and tribulations over the years have become the figure of fun amongst rival fans. Rival fans who had to watch Sir Alex Ferguson's Reds run riot across the country, lift the Champions League trophy while City was celebrating promotion to the top flight, only to drop again 1 year later. But now, the noisy neighbours are throwing a massive, unending house party under Guardiola, as evidenced by their Premier League domination over the last 5 years or so, and elevating that house party to a continental one as well, while United are searching for sustained success of their own, receiving funding from their owners, but not finding the glory that was so easy, that was so automatic for them while they were in their pomp. It's not a rivalry rooted in religion, class division, or anything like that. It's the good old-fashioned derby. And with two clubs on a more level playing field than perhaps they used to be, it's a rivalry that will never get old. Thanks for watching, guys, and enjoy the football.